And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, December 7th, 2018, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. We're going to talk about Pearl Harbor today. We're going to tie it into biblical prophecy and current events. We're going to put all of this together and tell you an interesting story that God has left for us and a warning for you and I. We're also going to talk about the third temple and the altar dedication that's coming up next week. We'll talk about this generation as we pull in Matthew 24 to Pearl Harbor, and we'll talk about a nation under blessings or cursings, and you will make the decision. All right, so let's begin with this. France riots with gas tax, the climate change funding. Now, this is really interesting what's going on over there. While the rest of the world is criticizing the United States for not being a part of the climate change funding, the way to do this now is to raise taxes, evidently, on everybody else. Well, this is the response from the people in France. The Yellow Vest protest is a part of the present and extraordinary venting of rage and resentment by ordinary people aimed at the mounting inequalities that have eroded their lives. The unrest began in response of rising gas taxes and has been building in intensity over the past 3 weeks, peaking on Saturday. Now, we're going to cover more about this next week because we have a big program today that ties in Pearl Harbor on this anniversary. But we couldn't go by without mentioning this. And I also got another slide here that's actually going to bring in some more pictures. Take a look at that. So if we can keep that up on the screen for just a few moments. Look at the amount of people, look at the amount of vests and the fires and the damage that's taken place. Here's another one. Look what they've done to the streets. I mean, they're just burning everything in sight. And this is just the beginning. All right, so I think that's the last picture that I have there. We're going to bring in a lot more of this. What's going on now is literally the beginning of that funding, that massive amount of funding that we talked about that it's going to take for talking about the climate change. Somewhere between 1.2 and 1.4 trillion dollars. So where are they going to get that money? When you look at the world and its economies over the last 10 years, the debt across the globe, not just the United States, across the globe, the debt is rising. Now they're going to start creating, you ready for this? They want to start creating in the middle of all this debt. They've been increasing debt year by year in all the little things that you and I do. Now they want to increase it into the way that you have to live and function like France is doing now with gas. When you have no money, where else are you going to get it? And it always boils down to the people at the very medium level income. That's who pays the price the most. Because if you control, you pass on the expense to those below you. This is just the beginning. It will get uglier and uglier as time goes on. Why is this important? Because you see, as this grows around the globe, in the civil unrest all across the world, they will look for someone, a charismatic person, to pull it all together and bring them peace. In comes the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. So I wanted to give you this beginning so you can be aware of what we're looking at as time goes on. That way you are not blindsided. So, all right, now, the third temple altar dedication. The Sanhedrin invites 70 nations to Hanukkah dedication altar for the third temple. So they sent out to 70 different nations into their priesthood, to inviting them to come for their dedication at the end of Hanukkah. I believe it's this coming Monday. See, the nascent Sanhedrin released a declaration to the 70 nations for Hanukkah to be read at the ceremony in Jerusalem on the last day of the holiday. The ceremony will include the consecration of a stone altar prepared for the use in the third temple. The declaration is intended as an invitation to the nations to participate in the temple and to receive its blessings. All right, so going on. According to the Jewish tradition, the tabernacle and Aaron the priest were consecrated for service on the last day of Hanukkah. That's not in the Bible, but that is their tradition, so they follow through with tradition. Right or wrong? Well, it's just not actually, Hanukkah is not even a part of the actual scripture in the way it is, except for the heritage, no different than we would look at the July 4th. For them, it's a very important thing. And historically, it's very important for them. I'm not trying to downplay it, but I'm trying to say, is this biblical? Did they actually do that in the Bible? Well, no, it's according to tradition. Rabbi Weiss explained to the Breaking News in Israel. So here's a picture of what they're trying to build and put into place. All right, so Rabbi Weiss explained to the Breaking News the information about Hanukkah. He said, it is fitting that we should invite the nations to the ceremony since Hanukkah is about to bringing in light into the darkness. So the Jews were meant to do this for the entire world, he said, quoting the prophet Isaiah. And actually the Jews did, which was through Jesus Christ. He was the light of the world, actually came in, and he was the one who was promised through the book of in Genesis to Jacob, and saying that this is the blessings and this is where it would break. One nation would given the blessings of the nations, and the other would be given the scepter promise. And of course, Jesus Christ fulfills that scepter promise. So now let's focus on this week. All right, so now we're going to do something today I think you're going to find very interesting. Is what God wants us to understand is we need to take a look as we go through the Bible here, is as we go through the Bible to take what he has given us in the past, put it to current events of what has taken place, and then bring it into prophetic fulfillment. So what we're looking at today is we want to pull in Matthew 24, December 7th, and talk about current events and all this takes place that we live in. So we're going to use the title, This Generation Shall Not Pass, which is also the title of a sermon that we delivered back in 2006. And we're going to show a little intro to that later, and we're going to show you how you can get that. It's going to be online where you can download it. Unfortunately, it's out of print. So we're hoping to go back and redo these in a more modern, with the equipment we have today, more modern digital video is going to be a lot more impressive looking. We're just trying to find time to get it all done. But it's an important story. That's why I'm giving it to you today. So in it, we're going to talk about President George H.W. Bush. If you thought we forgot him, the passing of a president, think again, because it ties into what we're talking about today. Another piece of the current events as we go through this. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, and Matthew 24. We're just going to talk about just a couple verses in Matthew 24. So now, watch how all this stuff plays in together, and we're going to show you how this is all a part of prophetic fulfillment. Not specifically the death of President Bush, but the time era in which he lived and the importance of his life. That generation is passing. And I'm going to show you how that comes into play through prophetic fulfillment. So now let's talk about December 7th, 1941. It says we are witnessing the passing of a generation, the greatest generation. Now, if you've been watching the news for the past week, you probably have heard that very phrase. I began with, it was in 2006, and I was up in Kansas City, and I was heading down with a group of brethren in Missouri at that particular weekend, and I was watching the news, and it just happened to be December 7th weekend. And that was the phrase. We are witnessing the passing of a generation, the greatest generation. And it rang true to some scriptures. I said, now, where did I hear that? That's something like that is in the Bible. That's where the sermon comes from, Matthew 24. So now, before we go on, let's play the video promo for that sermon. Now, it's an older video, so it's not as perfect as we really would like it, but it still tells an interesting story. Let's play that story.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened.
First promos that we actually did for some of our commercials. And you can see it's the sound's a little problem in the video. Anyway, it still tells a powerful story, and that's why we want to do that again. And we're going to show you how you can watch that online when you go to our website toward the end of our program. Special Mission Flight 41 that took place on Monday that brought President Bush back to Washington. So now we're going to talk about that first. We're going to pull in this story piece by piece, and we're going to tie it all in together. And then we're also going to use this portion of the program at Nuggets to put everything together and show you what God's telling us. All right, so now let's take a look at this. I was quite moved when I saw this, when I was actually preparing this program, when the news brought this up. You've probably seen it by now. Sully, the dog. George H.W. Bush welcomes the new dog, Sully. So that took place, and this was a tweet from him back in June 25th, 2018. So it's a great joy to welcome home the newest member of our family, Sully, a beautiful and beautifully trained lab. Wow. So could not be more grateful, especially for the commitment to our veterans. So I saw that, and then I said, wow, this is pretty neat about this dog and his compassion for animals. You know, the fact that God says He loves those who love animals, and He hates those who mistreat animals. I don't know if you knew that or not. We'll have to talk about that story in the future too. So now, then they came up with this picture. And so, wow. I said, now take a look at that. There's the dog. It says, travel with former H.W. Bush to the Capitol. It was that dog's responsibility to be the care of that individual. And so when you saw that, I said, wow, it brought tears to my eyes, just showing what God has done for these animals and putting into the compassion, and how they placed that picture to tell that story. So wow, that's pretty emotional. And they're actually bringing that dog with them. They brought him on the plane to Washington, and supposedly they're actually going to bring him by the casket. So it was like the phrase that when you see it all, there's a phrase that somebody put on and said, mission accomplished. Anyway, it touched my heart, and I thought I'd share that with you, and I hope it touches yours. You know, God's people really need to think about at the end time, when our job is done, that God has called each one of us to be able to care for and support one another. And we were up toward Maine, Massachusetts this past week, and I'll tell you more about that later. It is God's people and the brethren around the country are really looking how they can kind of do this very thing with God's elect. And wouldn't it be nice as God's church and we as God's people pull together, and when Jesus Christ returns, and we can get a chance to say, mission accomplished. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. So now let's talk about this. Let's talk about a little bit. I know you probably heard all the stuff that you can hear, so I want to bring out something that maybe you didn't hear before that's very important to God's people. George Herbert Walker Bush was the last president to serve in combat. So wow, the last president to serve in combat. It is amazing, and maybe I even shouldn't say this in a comparison, but he lost an election showing how the mindset of the people changed to a draft dodger on his second term. So you can see how the mindset of the people have been changing over the decades. That's important for what I'm going to talk about. We talk about the blessings and cursings of a nation. At that time, he was the youngest pilot in the Navy. He actually signed up on his birthday. He enlisted in the armed forces on his 18th birthday. He was the youngest pilot in the Navy when he got his wings. He flew 58 combat missions during the Second World War. A lot of people don't know that. He was actually a combat veteran in the war. On one of the missions over the Pacific, he was shot down and he was rescued by a U.S. submarine. So this is the actual picture. You know, I presume this is the correct picture. It's in the archives. It's in his museum of, you know, presidents have a museum. And that's him being rescued by the submarine after he was shot down. What an amazing story that we have here, a military hero. Okay, you also may not be aware of that there is an actual aircraft carrier named after him, the USS George H.W. Bush, an aircraft carrier named after him. So as I was looking at this, something really interesting popped out. So here's someone who's actually giving, so pull that up on the screen. I'm going to talk through it now. See the person who's actually giving the lecture. See if you can see who he is. And in case you can't see who he is, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's on the USS George H.W. Bush when the aircraft carrier went and docked at Israel. And here's a close-up of another spot when he was on the actual aircraft carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush. I said, wow, all these little stories I didn't know that. The interesting the ties between the United States and Israel. Now we've got the United States and we got tied in with Israel. We have a war hero shot down during the war and a president, the last president to ever serve in military combat. Now, let's pull this in with how does World War II and Pearl Harbor play into this? Now, we got a video here. It's a pretty good quality because it's hard to find good qualities of President Roosevelt's declaration of war. It runs around 4.5 to 5 minutes. So let's play that and I'll be right back.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Incredible strength at a time when a nation rose up, a nation who wanted peace, who rose up, turned to God, and went to work. And without the United States, this world would be a different place. And today, the United States is a different place. Let's talk about that now as we go on. December 7th, 1941. The phrase here that comes to mind from Matthew 24:34 says this, "Verily I say unto you that this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." Now, how does that tie into World War II, especially December 7th, 1941? Because it was on that day that through the American resolve to end this war, a tactical mission was set in place, and that eventually ended with the nation of Japan through the atomic bomb. So now let's take the nuggets of this. Let's begin connecting the dots to biblical prophecy, history, and the end time events. So now we have the atomic bomb that actually ended the war at that particular time. The atomic bomb countdown to Armageddon, the Nagasaki and the Hiroshima are the only instances where nuclear weapons were used in the human history against cities. August 6, 1945 marks the day that the U.S. dropped the atomic bomb named Little Boy on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and 3 days later, Nagasaki was also the target of an atomic bomb named Fat Boy. Now, what's amazing is that you walk down the street and you talk to a lot of young people, and those even in college today, they don't know anything about this. They have no clue anything of what was taking place in World War II. It's absolutely mind-boggling what our educational system are teaching the young people coming up. All right? Here's one called Ivy Mike's. It was detonated on November 1st, 1952. It was 10.4 megatons of TNT. All right, so what is that in relationship to the bombs that we've seen in Nagasaki and Hiroshima? It was equivalent to, all right, this is just one bomb, it was equivalent to, when you look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 200,000 people were killed. Entire city just wiped out flat on the face of the earth. It was equivalent, a 10.4 megaton of TNT in 1952 to 3,800 of those bombs. That's just one bomb that was created. That is just 7 years later that they was able to have that kind of capability. Now note, the megaton is 1,000 times the size of TNT. So this is like 3,800 or 38,000 times the size of that one bomb. That can wipe out small nations when you think about it. Then the radiation from this just carries on and on and on. Now, why am I talking about this? Again, Matthew 24. We'll get back to that in just a few minutes. Sometime later, the Soviets, called the RSD-220 hydrogen bomb, was 50 megatons. The U.S. bomb was 10.4. This is 50, all right, 50. That means that was done in October 1961. It was 19,000 times greater than Hiroshima. All right? That's the bomb. That's all it took. You see that bomb right there? That's the shell. That's the shell of what it was like to drop a 50 megaton bomb, TNT. All right, so you can see that has gone from where it was with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki to 50 times that. So now what are we looking at? When we look at Bible prophecy, we see all those things. So how does this fit? What has that got to do with end time prophecy? Let's take a look at that now. So here we have, I'm drawing you a little chart here. So let's take a look. 1945 was the first atomic bomb. 1952 was the first hydrogen bomb. And then we have the largest hydrogen bomb was in 1961. So now, Psalm 90:10 says this, "The days of our years are 70, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years." So it is universally accepted and believed that somewhere between 1948 to the hydrogen bomb in 1952, between the United States and Russia, that there was enough nuclear bombs stockpiled around the world, as we began to see the arms race escalating back then, that there were enough bombs already stockpiled that if it was going to shoot off somewhere and begin the war, it could eliminate every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth. It is universally believed that was possible as early as 1948. Somewhere between 48 and 52 is certainly all possible. So now let's take a look at that. All right. So now let's look at that in relationship to Psalm 90:10 and bring it back into Matthew 24. It is to believe that somewhere between 1948 and 1952 there was enough nuclear bombs to destroy mankind many times over. So now let's take a look at that in relationship to Psalm 90. Look what it says here, Psalm 90. We're going to bring up our days and our years of 70. That means 70 years. All right, in 70 years. And if by reason of strength they be 80, that would actually bring us to another 10 years. So now, if you went 70 years from 1948, that brings you to 2018 to 2022. Right there. We are right there right now. So what we're looking at now, we're looking at a time capsule of what God said from earlier in Psalms that's going to be tied in very closely to Matthew 24. All right, so let's keep telling the story. Mankind is given 70 years. All right. The phrase was in Matthew 24. Let me just mention it. We'll bring it back up again in a minute. This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. All what things? Let's look at this now. Now we're looking at the possibility, if God is kind, He gives man a little more time, He gives us 80 years. Now we're looking at 2028 to 2032. So now here we are, here 2028 to 2032. So now I've mentioned in sermons that I can make the argument that Jesus Christ could begin soon, coming back very quickly, or He could come back a little later. Now if we go to 2032, you will find more heavenly signs beginning to take place around that time also. So there's enough information that God's going to keep you guessing and have to trust Him. But the point is this, the time sequence of all these things are taking place. Had not World War II taken place, had not the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States would have never been looking for a way to get a nuclear bomb. But because they entered into the war, and Germany was already ahead of us in the nuclear arms race, that God has allowed mankind through miracles, many miracles of weather and things you could never believe that we could ever win, that during that time is that Germany now was rising up, that beast power, which is going to help the Holy Roman Empire. They were running in control, and it was a race. It was a foot race to end the war through nuclear weapons. Had it not been for Pearl Harbor, the United States may not have ever gotten into that war, because we chose to sit out when all of Europe was being destroyed, and we only helped England from a little ways. But because we were drawn into that war, it put us into a place to be able to now fight and to rise up against the evil that was taking over this world, including Germany. That's what put us on the nuclear arms race. Without being on that nuclear arms race, Matthew 24, that this generation shall not pass, the scripture I'm reading you in just a few minutes, would have never taken place. That's why all these things are beginning to come to pass. When we look at Scripture, you look at events, you find how the events fit the mode of what God's telling you, and you have a pretty good picture of what's taking place. So all those things are taking place. Now, let's get back to the chart. All right, you ready? Let's go back to the chart. Matthew 24:34 said this, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." Now, that's the title of what we're talking about. Now, what are we looking at here? The key timing to this is in Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22. Now, this is the key. This is the whole key to what we're looking at here. Verse 21, "For then shall be great tribulation, such was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved." So there you have it. So Jesus Christ is saying that from the time when it was possible that this generation will not pass, he says, when it was possible that the things that could take place, everything that he was talking about in the verses that led up to that statement, including this, that unless he cuts time short, no flesh would be saved. So here we're looking at, because of mankind, the war, Pearl Harbor, Germany, all these things all coming into play, the United States and Russia had the capability to bring verse 22 to pass. For the first time in the history of man, it was possible to destroy all flesh from the face of the earth. So that's what we're looking at. So then we have now the 70 years, that generation that was alive when these things came to pass. So anywhere between 2018 or 80 years, 70 years plus the 10, up to somewhere as far as 2032. You're safe anywhere in that God begins to bring it to a close. There's no way to actually know. But we do know what he says, just like the fig tree, we are in that season. Now, I know people want to tell you, we've always had this, we've always had that, we've always been wars, there's always been. Well, you know what? They've never always been this. Never since until 1948 or 52, somewhere in there, was it possible to destroy mankind from the face of the earth. So they can argue till they're blue in the face. These prophetic alignments, these scenarios, never existed before 1948. So we are in the time of the end. One other thing took place in 1948. You began to see the nation of Israel being established again. That would give us the foundation for the formulation of armies surrounding Jerusalem. So all these things are all coming into place. We are living, whether you want to believe it or not, doesn't matter. It's going to happen even if you don't believe it. It's going to happen because you are living in the time when Jesus Christ says, you see the leaves on the fig tree. In the summer, you know it's near. We are near. He goes on to say, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. All right, so let me back that up one more time. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So if you're here in this program, and this is touching a nerve in you, quite possibly God is calling you to understand the truth, to be a part of an end-time work. Take this information, take a few moments, take a quiet time, go in your prayer closet and pray before God and ask Him to help you understand the words of what we're talking about in the program today. Go on the website and take a look at all the sermons, because God may be calling you, as He says here, for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. All right, now, let's get back to our program here. Let's go on. Now, the second half is going to be a little less. I'm going to spend a little more time at the beginning of the program to talk about this. And we're going to just pull in blessings and cursings in the nation and let you make the decision where you might be. So before we do, I've got another little video here, approximately 5 minutes long. 5 things you don't know about Pearl Harbor. You're going to find this really, really interesting. Let's play that program.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
This is 5 things you don't know about Pearl Harbor.
Flight 611, we got him moving. We're going back to button up.
The December 7, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor spurred direct U.S. involvement in World War II. But while you may think that the decision to enter the war was unanimously approved, it actually wasn't. In fact, when Congress voted to declare war in Japan the day after the attack, Jeannette Rankin of Montana was the sole dissenting voice. A lifelong pacifist who had also voted against America's involvement in World War I, Rankin's decision was met with hisses in the gallery and pleas from her colleagues to change her vote, or at the very least abstain from casting it. When she refused to do so, Rankin outraged so many people that she effectively ended her political career.
People of the United States have already formed their opinions.
And thanks to her single dissenting voice, the declaration of war against Japan passed with a final tally of 388 to 1.
And well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nation.
Red 2 directly in front of us, 3rd. Let's get on it, Red directly to our front right now.
While we're all familiar with the air attack that took place at Pearl Harbor, a lesser-known part of the story is the fact that the Japanese also deployed several midget submarines for assaults against the island. One of these subs, commanded by Kazuo Sakamaki, became disabled and stuck on a beach in Oahu. Although Sakamaki attempted to blow his submarine up, the explosives failed to go off, and he was ultimately captured as America's first prisoner of war in World War II. After the attack ended, Sakamaki's submarine was recovered intact and taken on tour across the United States, where it was used to help raise money through the purchase of war bonds. While U.S. military forces worked to rebuild Pearl Harbor in the weeks following December 7th, the Japanese initiated a plan to attack the island for a second time. Codenamed Operation K, this second assault took place on March 4th, 1942, when two Japanese flying boat aircraft flew across the Pacific, refueled via submarine in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and arrived over Oahu in the middle of the night. Although their intention was to bomb the base at Pearl Harbor, blackout conditions and heavy cloud cover caused the pilots to become disoriented, and it forced them to mistakenly drop their payload way off target. The resulting blast damaged a few homes and buildings, but thankfully, it resulted in 0 casualties.
Black 5, double 6. I'm gonna get General 6, they're gonna fire a 3rd rocket, 3rd.
Although the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor resulted in massive devastation and an immense loss of American lives, there were a few U.S. ships that managed to escape unscathed. Among them was the USS Phoenix CL-46. A Brooklyn-class light cruiser, the Phoenix was anchored southeast of Ford Island on the morning of the assault. Since it was not considered a primary target, it was largely passed over by the Japanese. Throughout the remainder of World War II, the Phoenix escorted convoys, and it helped support troop landings throughout the Pacific theater. In 1951, 6 years after the war ended, the Phoenix was sold to the Argentine Navy, where it was ultimately renamed the ARA General Belgrano. There, the ship continued to serve for another 31 years, until in 1982, it was sunk by a British submarine during the Falklands War. Attracting more than 1 million visitors each year, the USS Arizona Memorial is perhaps the best-known World War II monument in the world. Officially dedicated on May 30th, 1962, the $500,000 structure was funded through donations from both the public and private sector. These donations were solicited through the help of several organizations and individuals, including none other than the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley. Elvis, who had recently finished a 2-year stint in the Army, performed a benefit concert at Pearl Harbor in March of 1961. Singing favorites like Heartbreak Hotel and Don't Be Cruel, the concert raised nearly $65,000, and it was the last time Elvis performed on stage until his return to Las Vegas almost 8 years later. While the assault on Hawaii became famous throughout the world, the Japanese military actually attacked several other locations on December 7th. Do you know where else the Japanese attacked? If so, post your answer below, or reach out to us through Twitter using hashtag 5ThingsYouDon'tKnow.
Oh, welcome back. Well, there you go. 5 things you didn't know about Pearl Harbor. Some of them didn't know. I didn't know myself. Thought we'd share that with you. So now let's get into the biblical nuggets portion of it. Let's talk about now a nation under blessings or cursings. Well, it's kind of obvious when you begin to look at things. Of course, you need to be called and be able to understand the truth, because if we look at the rest of the United States, especially the left ungodly type thinking, you would think the nation is actually being blessed right now, with all the things that are going, with all the change, with the LGBT movement, with abortion. And isn't it great to be such a free nation? Look what God says. Here's a chart, all right? So here's a chart of the U.S. debt versus the GDP from 1792 to 2012. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little box around these spikes. Here's the Anglo-American War of 1812. Look at the debt rise now with the Civil War. Here you have World War I. Now we have World War II. During World War II, the U.S. Army was smaller than the Army of Portugal. Can you believe that? The Army of the United States was literally smaller than the Army of Portugal. Now, if you look at these spikes, when the wars came in, you find the nation very lethargic, sometimes even moving away from God. You know, so you have the Civil War with slavery and an issue of all the other things that came into place at that time. But with each time, each one of these spikes, you've seen the nation draw closer to God again. And eventually, World War I, you see the nation at that time, it just grew and magnified until you began to see the 20s and the 30s and the alcohol, the drugs, and everything that was actually rising back then. Then you saw the Great Depression all come in. So you see the spikes of the debt that would actually take place. World War II became something a little different. World War II was like the launching of the greatness, finally bringing the greatness to the rest of the world. Without the United States, this world would have been under people like Japan and under Hitler with his 1,000-year reign. So here we have a nation, a peaceful nation, trying to just get along, not necessarily following God, and actually began moving away from God in many, many areas. God allowed these spikes to raise up a conscious awareness of God within their system, and they would turn to God. And each time they turned to God, God would bless them, especially you see during World War II. So at the end of each one of these spikes, you saw additional movements, like the industrial age after the Civil War that came in. Each time God made the nation greater and greater as it went. However, things are different here. There is no nation now, as we're seeing, they begin at what they call this great financial crisis. Whether you realize it or not, when you're being told how great the United States is doing financially, the debt is still outpacing the growth of the nation. But here, things are different. See, the mentality and the mindset here is not to turn to God. Now it is where it's turning on those who turn to God, trying to destroy the Christian that God has brought out. Now, what about this? Let's take a look at this blessings and cursing. Look what God says here. This is in this is Leviticus 16. I've got this slide that'll bring it in, but I'm going to save it at the end. There it is. It says, I will do this to you. I will even appoint terror over you, wasting disease and fever, which shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. So now what we're looking at, 9/11, September 9, 2001, all right? September 11, 2001. Is it 2001? I don't know why I'm just I got the numbers all confused. In the past, when God came down nation to allow turmoil, war, and adversity to come on the nation would rise up together and turn to God. It didn't happen this time. They brought everybody together, and for a short period of time, a very short period of time, they would, as if they turned to God. But they also brought in the Muslim movement because we didn't want to offend them. So for the first time, it wasn't a Christian an alignment to turn a nation to God. It began doing things on their own terms. And instead of this time the United States growing, it is sinking further and further into the abyss. And that's what's going on now. This time is different than all the times in the past for our nation because we have eliminated God from our way of thinking and from our society. Look what this goes on. I will appoint terror over you, wasting disease and fever, which shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. Now, did you know, this is true, the United States spends an average of, you know how much the United States spends on average? All right, this is from someone who worked in anti-terrorism around the world through the CIA, one of the directors. I tried to get the name beforehand. I didn't find it, but I will find it and bring it back because I'm going to be talking about this. The United States spends an average, you ready for this? $50 billion a year to protect us from the outside sources of coming in this nation through the CIA. $50 billion a year. With that, there are approximately, right, has an intertwined network of nearly 100,000 people to protect our nation. So now, when you see all of this, this is a fulfillment of God's warning in Leviticus 16. Leviticus 26, verse 16. So, blessings or cursings? That's a curse. This is the result of that curse. All right, that's the result of the curse. Now let's look at Deuteronomy 28, the blessings. And I encourage each person who's watching this program, go to Deuteronomy 28 and go to Leviticus 26. Read the two chapters on blessings and cursings, and then take a look at the fruits of those words and look at our nation, and you make a decision. Chapter 28, verse 1. It shall come to pass, if you shall hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord your God, and observe to do all his commandments, which I command you this day, that the Lord will set you on high of all the nations on the earth, and that all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you will hearken to the voice of the Lord your God. So now, that's the blessings of what God says he would do if we listen to him. Look at the cursings. I'm just going to give you a few. And there's a lot of them. God gives specifically what they're going through. He also goes into specifics. If you don't change, he's going to add more. You don't change, you're going to add more. Giving people time to repent. Cursings, verse 47. Because you serve not the Lord your God with joyfulness. And I put that in capital. Because people think, well, it's a burden to serve God. No, it's not. God says, you didn't serve me with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. You can bring on curses. Therefore shall you serve your enemies, in which the Lord shall send against you in hunger and thirst and nakedness and want of all things, and shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck till he has destroyed you. Now, what do you think it takes for 100,000 people with $50 billion a year? Where do you think all that money is coming from? It's coming from the people in the resources that continues to drain this nation. That's what we're looking at. So the Lord shall bring a nation against you from afar. Where do we see September 11th? A nation come from afar. What are we looking at on the southern borders with Mexico and in the southern Central and South America? All right, all the strangers coming from afar. So from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies, a nation whose tongue you shall not understand. All right, going on. A nation of fierce countenance, which you shall not regard the person of old, and nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of your cattle and the fruit of your land, until you be destroyed, which is also leave you neither corn or wine or oil, or the increase of your kine or flocks or your sheep, until he hath destroyed you. Now listen, this past Sunday, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, worked in an agreement to begin talking and negotiating against tariff. Here's the thing you need to be aware of, is God turns people to him. Right? He says God turns people to him, and they react according to the biblical principle. This is what's going on right now. God bless us. And like he told all the farmers, this is good for the farmers. it also puts a dependency upon the United States. So God takes those same things that when you turn away from Him, now you've got a nation who's dependent upon you to supply them with what? What we're reading right here, with corn, with wine, with oil. So when you begin to cut those things off, you'll see the anger and rise up among the nations, and eventually it will come to the stage that the United States can't defend itself. They'll run out of $50 billion a year. Who knows, by that time, maybe it's $100 billion a year. And there won't be anything, so they raised taxes. And it began subverting what it has, it says right here, until there's nothing left to defend itself. We're at those stages right now. When you remember that chart, 2018 to 2022, or 2028 to 2032, in those passages and in those parallels, you're looking at the continual drain of the United States, that it cannot keep up this pace forever. It is weakening itself little by little. And why? Because it hasn't turned to God. And all these things are coming to play little by little, and they're mounting. And you're beginning to see this grow and grow and grow going on here with the cursings. It says, and he shall besiege you in your gates until your high fenced walls come down, wherein you trusted throughout all the land. And he shall besiege you in the gates throughout all the land which the Lord your God has given you. We've been covering that in recent weeks. We actually have it in the cover on our quarterly magazine, Isaiah 1:7, talking about our gates and the stranger coming in. All right, going on. All right, I thought that was that's where we're at on the end. So now, let's wrap up what we have here. We're moving through a period of time that God has laid out, giving us time to repent, giving us time to change. Have you ever wondered why it took almost 100 years for Israel to fall and Judah to fall, all these decades it took? It was through the course of human events, of mankind turning away from God, that the living laws of God that exist today, when they're broken, they bring consequences. Those consequences add to what's going on, just like climate change. All these weather patterns could stop immediately. You don't need trillions of dollars. All you need is repentance. If mankind would repent and turn to God, the weather patterns would fall back into place, and you would not have what you're looking at today. Wouldn't have all these fires. Wouldn't have all the earthquakes. God would bless the nations, but they won't. And so thus, it'll continue to get worse. And what you've seen in France that's taking place now is going to begin taking place in the years ahead around the rest of the world. Okay, all right, let's bring it to a close now. Let's go to the Home Office, December 7th, 2018. I don't have too much here, but I do want to bring this out. This generation shall not pass. Did you catch that? That's real quick. So I said earlier, well, I didn't know how to slow that down. So let me bring up another slide and show you what you just missed in that little video. This generation shall not pass. It's online, so we're going to put a link on the webpage when you get the news link this time. It'll take you to where you can watch this sermon. And did we find the Bible study also? Great, we got the Bible study. There's also a Bible study that goes along with that sermon, so you can actually watch the video and then go through that pamphlet that you're looking at right here. I don't think it has that cover on it, but anyway, it's the Bible study. So you can actually go through and do a Bible study on the very subject that I'm talking about today. We did that from 2006, so I hope you'll take time to do that. If you fellowship with the group, get together on a Sabbath and sit down after services or before services. Have a Bible study. Go through this over the next few weeks, and I think you're going to be really excited with what you're going to find. All right, we just got back. Actually, we got back in Sunday night. It was after midnight from Sturbridge, and we had a great, wonderful group of people that were up there. We actually had people from 6 different states came together from the Northeast. So we're really excited about the possibility of working with all the different brethren and what we can possibly do. In fact, we even talk about the possibility of reestablishing a feast site for them, because they've been holding feast sites in the past, and trying to get that going for them again this year. And we'll see what happens. So pray about that. And if you're anywhere in the Northeast, we'll be getting you more names and information as we go. We've got pictures, and I'll share a lot of that with you hopefully next week and certainly in the next quarterly. But in the meantime, if you're anywhere in the Northeast, contact Mo or Jean Dion at 401 area code 641-5802, or go to dionproperties@gmail.com. That's dionproperties@gmail.com. All right, so now next week, all right, this is next week. We're going to be closer to home, Mobile, Alabama. Now I think I got this late last night. The address, and this was the address that popped up on Google. So I believe they got a new location where they're meeting at. So if it's not the right building, blame me. All right, but they're meeting every Sabbath at 10 a.m. We're going to be over there next December 15th at 10 a.m. at 5563 Jackson Road in Mobile, Alabama. If you look for directions or you need more information, please contact Bobby Edmonds. You might remember Bobby. He's actually been here in New Orleans. He's delivered sermons here, and he's delivered sermons for us at the feast in Fort Walton. His phone number is 241-709-0366. All right, in the mail last week. If you haven't got it yet, let us know. The quarterly went out. This was the DVD offering for this month. God's Seals, Personally Touched by God. And I was doing that sermon as I traveled, and the people that we gave it to really helped them touch a nerve that's something they haven't thought about with their calling before. And we also got the quarterly that's with it. It's talking about what I just talked about today in Isaiah 1:7, and lots of information, post-feast information. So if you're not on the mailing list, write in or call in, and we'll be glad to put you on that. And we send these out to quarterly every 3 or to 4 times a year. So that's really information. Well, that's about it for our program. So now we got a little new connection here with our little puppy friends. They're heading into winter time. And we're going to close in video. It's going to be a World War II tribute. So we're going to close our program a little different today. I'm going to say just a couple words here before we close. We'll go to the video, and that'll be the end of the program, and I won't be coming back. I wanted to leave everyone with the thought of what these veterans had lived through to protect the nation that we live in today, that they have gone through, that even the veterans are going through today. It's a tribute to World War II veterans. It was quite touching and quite moving. And when I finished watching that, I was pretty silent. So what I want to do today is I want to thank everyone now in advance for being a part of our program. Thank you for sharing the word to everyone that's there, and to take a moment when you finish this to take some quiet time, go to God, and thank God for all the things He's done for our great nation, for the generation, the greatest generation, the generation that our president who just died, President Bush, of that generation, who gave his all, who risked his life, shot down, so that this nation can be one nation under God. Enjoy the video, and until next week, God be with you.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.